Is the world just made up of one thing, or many things? Or more importantly, should we view the world as one thing or many different things? Philosophers have been debating this issue for a long time, and there's no way a single video like this can give that debate justice. We can, however, look at one perspective on that debate, specifically the pragmatic perspective. This is coming from the fourth lecture on pragmatism by William James. Now, I should mention that James is going to be talking about these ideas, monism and pluralism, in their general form instead of any specific variety, because for monism you got substance monism, priority monism, existence monism, and the same with pluralism. And it'd be a lot to talk about in a lecture. James is going to stick with a general idea of monism and pluralism. But even so, here's an official definition from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. There are many monisms. What they share is that they attribute oneness. Pluralism, to simplify things, is going to be roughly the opposite, seeing multiplicity in the world instead of unity. There's also dualism, which divides things in two, but who gives a shit about dualism? For examples of monism and pluralism in philosophy, think Leibniz and his theory of monads for pluralism, and for monism, think Spinoza's theory of God. And for those who are still new to philosophy and have no idea what any of that meant, for monism, think about an aquarium being seen as just one entire thing, the aquarium. And for pluralism, think about an aquarium being seen as all the multiple fish in the tanks, and even the individual water molecules. I know this is super simplified, and I'm not that well read on metaphysics, so correct me if I get anything wrong. But the takeaway here is that James is going to view monism as seeing the world as one, and pluralism as seeing the world as many. And you probably want one thing right now, and that's for me to actually start this video. Hey, it's Paul and welcome to Philosophy Tunes, and today we are continuing our long journey into the philosophy of pragmatism. I've decided to set up a playlist with the videos being in order of the date that the works were released. But in case you're too lazy to learn about pragmatism and just want the nutshell version, here it is. Pragmatism is going to not so analyze if an idea is objectively true with a capital T, but rather it's going to ask, assuming this idea is believed to be true, what practical consequences result? What are the practical consequences that'll come with believing this idea or that? For a more detailed explanation, check out this video. But now that we have our pragmatic method, and these two competing concepts, let's see what happens. Now, even though James is being general about monism and pluralism, he starts the lecture by speaking on their importance to people. If you know whether a man is a decided monist or a decided pluralist, you perhaps know more about the rest of his opinion than if you give him any other name ending in "ist." To believe in the one or in the many, that is the classification with the maximum number of consequences. I don't know if I fully agree, but then again, I'm not big on metaphysics. What does come to mind is certain monistic theories that do play a large part in people's life. And James is going to acknowledge that monism, this theory of unity and oneness, is more valued generally by people. The unity of things has always been considered more illustrious, as it were, than their variety. When a young man first conceives the notion that the whole world forms one great fact, he feels as if he were enjoying a great insight, and looks superstitiously on all who still fall shortly of this sublime conception. I mean, if you did somehow come across the great one truth of the whole universe, the theory of everything, I could see it being a pretty emotional experience. Like you discovered the answer to everything, and you might feel a sense of superiority to people who don't see the entirety of the world through your theory. You see a bit of this with political theories, like how you're just living your life, then some guy comes up and tells you how everything is political. Like I could pull out a box of Fruity Pebbles and they'll tell me the political context behind it. But after these acknowledgements, James is going to state in his words how he's going to apply the pragmatic method to evaluate these two ideas. Granting the oneness to exist, what facts will be different in consequence? What will the unity be known to us? The world is one, yes, but how one? What is the practical value of the oneness for us? So James lists out 8 different practical consequences that result from monism. I'll do my best to summarize so I don't take too much of your time. I know you got things to do and other YouTubers to watch. So our first consequence of monism is that we're even able to talk about the world. Sometimes, we just want to talk about the world abstractly, like Louis Armstrong and What a Wonderful World. But while some monists claim that only monists can talk about the world as a whole, kind of like a gotcha moment, we could also think of the world as multiple parts. James explains that pluralists can also talk about the world in the abstract. Let things be one insofar forth. You could then fling such a word as universe at the whole collection of them. but what matters it? It still remains to be ascertained whether they are one in any further or more valuable sense. So the second consequence is about continuity in regards to space and time. This sounds like it's going to be one of those concepts that'll fly over your head, but trust me, it's not that hard. James gives an example about grains of sand. Would the monist view all these grains of sand as hanging together? And would the pluralist view the grains of sand as detached and separated? What if we compared this to other things in the universe? Like, should I view my bed as detached and disconnected from my car? Or should I see them as connected through space and time? Obviously connected, so I think the monists win one here, but I also don't think pluralists are really waking up in bed being like, yeah, I can't come into work. I'm in bed and I'm disconnected from my car and separated from it. Man, I wish I could use that excuse though. The third consequence is about influence. Do things in the world influence one another, or are they all separate? James talks about acquaintances like how I know eternalized philosophy, and he knows people, and they know people, and eventually a whole network is created. And this network might lead to a oneness, but James thinks that you might hit a dead end with this network of acquaintances. However, we gotta remember, this dude is dead, and has been dead for more than 100 years. Now, we have the internet and social media, which means more connections, more networks, and possibly unity. The fourth consequence is about causal unity. For every action, there is a reaction, says Dexter, or one of those scientist types, I don't know. And everything can be traced back to a cause. Can we view a oneness in the world in terms of these causes? We might also have to locate the first cause, or first mover, as some philosophers refer to it as. The cause which has no cause itself. Are we all unified in this first cause then? That might be one way to look at it. The fifth consequence is this genetic unity, which is a complicated topic. This is the opening quote. Things exist in kinds. There are many specimens in each kind. And what the kind implies for one specimen, it implies also for every other specimen of that kind. So there's hawks, ostriches, and penguins, and while these things are each different, they're specimens belonging to the same kind, which is birds. And that kind can be defined roughly as a feathered animal that lays eggs. And that definition then unifies the specimens within that kind. So we have these smaller groups of unity in the form of these kinds, but is there a mega kind? One super kind in which everything in the universe can fit under? James proposes beings, thinkables, and experiences as these potential candidates, but doesn't really go much more in depth. Instead, he kinda leaves this question of a mega kind and its practical value aside for now, as it honestly can lead to a giant rabbit hole. I'd imagine Heidegger would have something to say about beings though. So consequence number 6, don't worry, we're 3/4 of the way there. Consequence number 6 is a unity of purpose. So we all have purpose in life, right? Guys, please say yes or this entire channel has failed. And many times these purposes work hand in hand with other people's purposes to form a massive purpose. Think about the market economy, how all these different actors are pursuing their own purposes, which goes in line with the purposes of others. And what if with all these different purposes, we're really serving one absolute unifying purpose? Well, it's possible, but James doesn't really buy it. For one thing, people's purposes conflict. The many people in the world have competing interests, and it's a bit much to say that all these conflicting interests can be boiled down into just one unifying interest. Whoever claims absolute teleological unity, saying that there is one purpose that every detail of the universe subserves, dogmatizes at his own risk. Consequence number 7 is the aesthetic value of unity. It's kinda cool if you view the world and all of human history as having one big unifying story, connecting events like Napoleon's rise to power with you, right now, watching this video. Like the last consequence, James does think it'd be a bit dogmatic of a position to take, but he does recognize that it's a very interesting idea for someone to hold. Like the whole world and its history is one big epic play. And consequence number 8 is the idea of the one knower. This is the obvious one. The idea of a god or an absolute would lead to this idea of unity. But James has already talked about the pragmatic value of religious belief in other works, so I won't go super in depth here. Now those are the 8 consequences James picks up on, and you might be a little confused or left wondering what the overall conclusion here is. Well, as we've seen, there are practical advantages and disadvantages to believing either in monism or pluralism. James believes in a good mix of both. We see clearly enough where pragmatism stands. With her criterion of the practical differences that theories make, we see that she must equally abjure absolute monism and absolute pluralism. The world is one, just so far as its parts hang together by any definite connection. He does mention that pragmatism might slightly err on the side of pluralism, in that pluralism doesn't mean that these different things can make up a larger thing and categories, just that those different things are emphasized. But ultimately, it's a bit of a harmonization between the one and the many. And hey, you made it to the end of the video. Congratulations, I'm proud of you. See, you stick around to the end, you get congratulated. If you enjoyed this video, then like, subscribe, hit the bell, and go check out the newly created Pragmatism playlist. And with that, I wish you all a beautiful rest of your day.